March 24, 2015, two friends went for a girls' night out, but by the next morning, one of them was dead. This death remained unsolved for 2 years, but the clue that led authorities to her killer was something even the most experienced detectives could not have anticipated: a single selfie photo. Here are the most disturbing last selfies taken moments before death.
20-year-old Sierra Joughin went missing Tuesday night during a bike ride. Tonight, police discover her remains.
And was a junior at the University of Toledo. She was last spotted biking back home on County Road 6 after parting ways with her boyfriend.
On the evening of July 19, 2016, 20-year-old Sierra Joughin climbed onto her bicycle and began the short ride back to her grandparents' home in Metamora, Ohio. She had spent the afternoon with her boyfriend, Joshua Kolasinski, who rode his motorcycle beside her for most of the way. Before they parted, Josh snapped a few selfie photos of Sierra smiling, images that would tragically become the last pictures ever taken of her. When Josh got home, he expected a quick text confirming that she had made it home safely, but that message never arrived. Around the same time, Sierra's family also noticed something was off. They knew her habits well, and disappearing without a word was completely out of character. After searching along County Road 6, the path she would have traveled, and finding nothing, they contacted the sheriff's office to report her missing. Deputies responding to the call soon discovered Sierra's bike abandoned in a nearby cornfield, just half a mile from her house. Scattered nearby were disturbing clues: a box of fuses, a lone sock, a pair of men's sunglasses, and a screwdriver. Corn stalks in the area were snapped and smeared with what appeared to be fresh blood, pointing to a struggle that had ended violently. And at that point, authorities suspected she had either been killed or abducted. Naturally, suspicion first fell on her boyfriend, since he was the last person known to have seen her. But after questioning him, investigators cleared him of involvement. Then, a witness stepped forward claiming to have seen a van racing away from the cornfield that same evening. The driver's reckless behavior had caught enough attention that the witness wrote down the license plate number, and that plate traced back to a man named James Worley. Now, when detectives went to Worley's home in Delta, which he shared with his elderly mother, their suspicions deepened. Without prompting, Worley blurted out that he had been on his motorcycle the day Sierra vanished, but insisted he hadn't killed anyone. This immediately raised red flags. Investigators then secured search warrants for his property and vehicles, and what they uncovered was beyond chilling. In a barn behind the house, police found a disturbing collection of women's underwear, some stained with blood, a freezer buried beneath the dirt floor with its carpeted lining soaked in blood, plastic bags crammed with women's clothing, handcuffs, sex toys, latex gloves, zip ties, and even a mattress hidden between bales of straw. Inside Worley's red pickup truck, they discovered pepper spray, a ski mask, and strands of human hair, evidence that solidified their suspicions. And later that same day, Sierra's body was found in a cornfield, several miles from where her bicycle was found. An autopsy revealed she had endured prolonged captivity before her death. She was found wearing a lace bra and an adult diaper, which were clear signs that she had been degraded and abused. But while she had suffered a severe head injury, the actual cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation, since a rubber dog toy had been forced into her mouth with such violence that it broke a tooth, blocking her airway. Now, after Sierra's death made headlines, another woman came forward accusing Worley of a previous sexual assault. This strengthened the case against him, and prosecutors charged him with Sierra's abduction and murder. He pleaded not guilty, but after all the other evidence provided, Worley was sentenced to death by lethal injection, the harshest penalty available under Ohio law. Following years of appeals, an execution date was eventually set for May 20th, 2025. But when that day came, his execution was halted after his defense team filed new motions. The case remains under review, and as of now, a new execution date has not been scheduled.
The night of partying and drinking began with these two friends posing for this Facebook photo. It ended in tragedy, with Brittney Gargle's body found on this stretch of rural road.
On the night of March 24th, 2015, two friends, Cheyenne Antoine and Brittney Gargle, took a couple of pictures together before heading out for an evening in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. They even posted some of those pictures online. However, within a matter of hours, 18-year-old Brittney would be dead, her body discovered on the side of a rural road. And what ultimately exposed her killer was evidence hidden in plain sight. Brittney was known by her friends as energetic, cheerful, cheerful and full of life. She was just weeks away from graduating high school, having worked long hours to pay her own fees and meet her needs. Raised by her grandmother because her mother struggled with addiction and her father was absent, Brittney dreamed of one day owning a chain of hotels, and to support herself, she worked multiple jobs, including shifts at a local pizzeria. But tragically, her dreams would never become a reality due to a single accident. That night, Brittney planned to relax and have fun in Saskatoon with her close friend Cheyenne. The two had been inseparable since 9th grade, connected in part by difficult childhoods. Cheyenne had lost both her parents early in life and grew up in foster care, where she endured abuse. Now, before going out, they stopped by the home of a friend, Atasha Story, where Brittney asked to borrow some gas money. Then later, at 12:02 a.m., the pair shared a smiling selfie from Brittney's grandmother's home. But unfortunately, that photo would have become Brittney's last, because just 6 hours later, at 6:02 a.m., police were called after a driver discovered a young woman's body on a road near a landfill on Saskatoon's outskirts. She had no shoes, was unresponsive, and later pronounced dead. But officers weren't convinced this was just an accident. At the scene, they gathered a few items: a leather jacket, a wristwatch, and a black braided belt, hoping someone might identify her. Authorities released photos of the victim's tattoos, which featured stars and a lion's head. And it wasn't long before investigators confirmed the body belonged to Brittney Gargle. Detectives then combed through Brittney's social media, where one recent post caught their attention. It was from Cheyenne, who wrote, "Where are you? Haven't heard from you. Hope you made it home safe." When questioned, Cheyenne told police she and Brittney had gone bar hopping that night. She said they started at the Manchester Brew Pub, later went to the Colonial Pub and Grill, and around 4 a.m. attended a house party where Brittney began chatting with an older man. According to Cheyenne, the two eventually separated, claiming Brittney left with the man while she herself went to visit her uncle at an assisted living facility. Cheyenne even had her uncle speak to officers, backing up her story. But an autopsy later revealed that Brittney had been strangled, and the murder weapon was the braided belt found beside her body. DNA testing later showed two profiles, Brittney's and another unidentified one. Meanwhile, parts of Cheyenne's story didn't hold up. Surveillance footage confirmed the two friends were at the Manchester Brew Pub, but there was no sign of them ever visiting the Colonial. Even more damning, video from the assisted living facility proved Cheyenne never showed up that night. And when police pressed her uncle again, he admitted he had lied at her request. The uncle explained that Cheyenne had told him a different version, that she and Brittney ended up at a motel with two men, used drugs, and that a fight over cocaine broke out. Cheyenne allegedly said that when she returned from the bathroom, Brittney was dead with marks on her neck, and the men forced her at gunpoint to help move the body. Detectives, however, found no evidence to support this story. Weeks later, with still no arrests, Brittney's family worried her case would go cold. But then a breakthrough came, not from forensics, but from family. Cheyenne's aunt called the police and reported that Cheyenne had returned home shortly after Brittney's death in a frantic state. The family told investigators what they had witnessed, but Cheyenne continued to deny involvement. In fact, 6 months later, she even posted on Brittney's Facebook page,
"I miss you so much. You were way too young to go. Rest in paradise, my angel."
Still, without solid proof, investigators had little to charge her with until 2017, when they revisited the selfie Brittney posted hours before her death. In that picture, Cheyenne was wearing the exact belt investigators believed was used to strangle Brittney. New DNA testing confirmed the unknown sample from the belt belonged to Cheyenne, leading to her arrest and second-degree murder charge. Once in custody, Cheyenne finally admitted she and Brittney had gone to a house party, used drugs and alcohol, and later argued. She claimed she blacked out and didn't remember what happened, but woke up knowing something terrible had occurred. Senior Crown Prosecutor Robin Ritter noted that one of the most frustrating aspects was that Cheyenne never really gave a clear motive for why she killed Brittney, and because intent to kill couldn't be proven, prosecutors accepted a plea to lessen the charge to manslaughter instead. In January 2018, Cheyenne Antoine was then sentenced to 7 years in prison, a punishment Brittney's family felt was far too lenient. Nevertheless, in 2024, after serving her time, Cheyenne Antoine was granted parole. On June 20th, 2014, Colette Moreno, a bride-to-be in what should have been one of the happiest chapters of her life, was killed in the most devastating way imaginable. But before getting into the details of that tragic incident, it's important we understand her backstory, because it helps us understand how her life ended so soon. You see, Colette's story began in San Diego, California, where she was born the oldest among 4 sisters. She had a bubbly personality and loved sharing her life online. But remember this detail, because it's going to come in handy later. Now, almost immediately after finishing high school, Colette became a mom. Her son, Braden, was born on September 27th, 2008, and right from his birth, she was devoted to him. Her Facebook page was filled with heartfelt posts about the joy she found in being his mother. She often shared how deeply she wanted to give him the best life possible, even admitting that some days she just wished she could hold him forever. She poured her heart into raising her son, though she still hoped to find love. And her wish came true when she met a man named Jesse Arcobasso at a party. The two hit it off instantly, and after 3 years together, Jesse proposed. Then, almost immediately, they started planning a wedding in Jamaica, set for July 26, 2014. And over the following year, Colette's social media captured engagement shoots, fun moments, and the life she and her partner were building. Yet, all those hopes of building a family and chasing a brighter future were shattered in an instant on that tragic afternoon in June 2014. Colette and her best friend, Ashley Theobald, were driving to her bachelorette party when Colette, who was asthmatic, started struggling to breathe because of the thick exhaust pouring out of a truck in front of them. They were stuck behind it on Missouri Highway 5, where a double yellow line made passing dangerous. Ashley, with tears in her eyes from watching her friend struggle to breathe, glanced left to see if the road was clear, and for a moment, it seemed safe. So she steered their Chevy Malibu across the yellow lines and sped up to pass quickly. However, a Dodge Ram came over a hill they hadn't noticed, and as Ashley swerved, the Ram's driver swerved too, causing a full-on collision on that spot. Just 8 minutes earlier, Colette had snapped this selfie with her friend, capturing how happy they were before the crash and how oblivious they were to what was to come next. The Dodge Ram's driver survived without serious injuries, and Ashley was treated at the hospital for minor wounds. Meanwhile, Colette, even though she was wearing her seatbelt, sustained multiple injuries. She was rushed to a hospital, but sadly didn't survive. And despite the tragedy, many online focused on that selfie, unfairly blaming it for her death instead of what truly caused the accident. Anne Faber was just 25 years old when she went missing on September 29, 2017, while cycling near Utrecht in the Netherlands. This is the selfie she took before that ride. But the very next one, captured shortly before her disappearance, would probably leave you traumatized. Anne loved being outdoors, especially riding her bike. She lived in Utrecht, was building her career in finance, and kept close connections with her family and friends. However, on that tragic Friday afternoon, the weather suddenly turned stormy, with heavy rain and strong winds. Still, Anne, an experienced cyclist, decided to go for a ride. At one point, she took this very disturbing selfie in Barn and sent it to her boyfriend. Unfortunately, that would be the last photo ever seen of her, as right after that moment, no one would ever hear or see from her again. Police and volunteers immediately launched a search around Utrecht, with a major breakthrough coming on October 3rd, when friends found Anne's jacket near Hoes ter Heide. DNA tests on the jacket pointed directly to Michael P., a 27-year-old man with a disturbing past. He had already been convicted of violent sexual crimes and was living at a forensic psychiatric clinic in Den Dolder, not far from where Anne vanished. He was arrested on October 9th, and at first, Michael said nothing. He didn't answer questions, didn't respond to detectives, nothing. But eventually, after so much pressure and realizing that his DNA was found on her jacket, he confessed to kidnapping and murdering Anne. He went further to explain that he had been riding a stolen scooter when he crossed paths with her. He claimed he crashed into her, which led to an argument, and then, at knife point, forced her into the woods, where he her. Things escalated when Anne spotted a passing cyclist and shouted for help, making him slash her throat and stab her multiple times to silence her. Michael P. admitted he had been high, snorting Ritalin, though he insisted the killing wasn't premeditated. Afterward, he initially hid Anne's body at a spot before moving it to a wooded area in Zeewold, where he buried her deep underground. And so on October 12th, after Michael finally gave police the directions, her body was recovered. On July 17th, 2018, Michael P., who had previously served time for two teenage girls in 2012, was sentenced to 28 years in prison, followed by compulsory psychiatric treatment. The court described his crime as unscrupulous and pointed to the extreme violence he used, saying Anne's suffering must have been immense. In 2019, Michael P.'s lawyers tried to appeal his conviction, but the court shut it down. The judge called out his cold and calculated actions, making it clear that yes, his psychological problems might have lowered his responsibility, but not enough to overturn the verdict. On top of his prison sentence, he was also ordered to pay Anne's family €56,000 in compensation. Besides, Anne's case did more than just expose one man's crimes. It revealed major flaws in the Dutch justice system, because despite his violent record, Michael P. was allowed unsupervised leave from a forensic clinic near the end of his sentence. Why? Because he'd managed to hide parts of his past from doctors, so they didn't fully grasp how dangerous he actually was. Of course, the public outrage over this was massive, but thankfully it did lead to some reforms in how violent offenders are monitored. It also became a turning point in the Netherlands' ongoing debate about forensic care and rehabilitation. The only thing is, none of that helped Anne's family get over the devastating loss of their daughter. On the morning of November 1st, 2017, an 18-year-old Russian student, Andrei Emelianikov, murdered his teacher, took selfies with the body, and then took his own life. Crazy? I know, but this story didn't start that morning. It had been building for months. You see, 44-year-old Sergei Danilov was a health and safety teacher at the Western Complex of Continuous Education on Gvardeyskaya Street in Moscow. He was a father of 3, and before teaching, he had served as an army officer. However, in recent times, he'd been dealing with a difficult student. That student was Andrei. Andrei was failing his classes, and Sergei had already started the process of expelling him from school. Their relationship was tense, and no one could have imagined how far things would spiral. Outside of school, Andrei spent nearly all of his time in front of his computer. He was addicted to violent video games, and one character in particular seemed to consume him: Walter Sullivan, the villain from Silent Hill 4, The Room. In the game, Sullivan's mission is to kill 21 people as part of a cult ritual, and Andrei was so obsessed that he even made the character his Facebook profile picture. But then came November 1st. Before entering class that day, Andrei posed for a selfie. He would later post it on his VK social media account. No one knows what was said between teacher and student in that empty classroom, but what happened next was brutal. Armed with a sharp kitchen knife, Andrei slashed Sergei's neck, leaving the father of 3 bleeding out on the floor. Investigators believe the murder may have been tied to the infamous Blue Whale Challenge, a twisted online game that targeted depressed teens with a series of 50 escalating tasks. And worst of all, the final challenge was always suicide. Police speculated that killing his teacher could have been task number 49. Either way, after the stabbing, Andrei didn't run. Instead, he pulled out his phone, snapped pictures of his dying teacher, and even posed for a selfie with the body, uploading it straight to social media. But the horror wasn't over. For the final step, task hash 50, Andrei turned to a disturbing method of suicide. Using a circular saw, the same one he had shown off in that selfie, he ran it through his neck, nearly decapitating himself in the process. In February 1990, a teenage girl named Regina K. Walters believed she was finally breaking free from the life that once felt like it was holding her captive. She left home determined to start over, and by her side was her boyfriend, 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones. The 2 teenagers from Pasadena, Texas dreamed of escaping their suburban lives and running away to Mexico. But instead of finding freedom, they crossed paths with one of the most notorious killers to ever haunt America's highways. Regina was born on May 5th, 1975 in Pasadena, Texas. She had only just started her teenage years when she decided to run away. Ricky, meanwhile, had grown up in child protective services after being removed from his home at a young age. And despite a few run-ins with the law, friends described him as quiet, even gentle. So when he and Regina got together, it seemed like real love. 2 kids ready to take on the world. But their plan to reach Mexico ended in tragedy when they met Robert Ben Rhodes. Rhodes himself had a troubled past. Growing up in Council Bluffs, Iowa, he got in trouble as a teenager for tampering with cars and fighting in public. His father had been arrested for a girl, but took his own life before he could even stand trial. Later, Rhodes was dishonorably discharged from the Marines in the 1960s and eventually settled into life as a long-haul trucker. However, that job gave him the perfect cover to hunt vulnerable people across the country. By the time he picked up Regina and Ricky, he had already claimed other victims. Just a month earlier, he lured Patricia Walsh and Douglas Siskowski, another young couple trying to hitchhike, and like he had always done, he killed the man first and then slowly tortured the woman. Now, while hitchhiking their way out of Houston, Rhodes, posing as a trucker, pulled over and offered them a ride, something countless young travelers relied on back then. Almost immediately, Rhodes killed Ricky, and that was because he wanted Regina for himself. Then, for the next several weeks, Regina was held captive in that mobile torture chamber Rhodes had built inside his truck. It had a hidden compartment accessible from the cab, a space fitted with handcuffs on the ceiling. And for Regina, that small dark chamber became a prison for nearly a month. During that time, she was abused in horrific ways. At one point, he shaved her pubic hair and cut her hair short as a part of the twisted routine he carried out on his victims. Eventually, he drove her to an abandoned barn and staged a photo one that would go down as her last. In it, Regina stood frozen in fear, unaware she was only moments away from her death. Now, Rhodes was later caught, and when authorities eventually searched his home, they uncovered photos documenting Regina's captivity. The images showed Regina at different points, with varying hair lengths, bruises, and expressions of terror, proof that she had been held far longer than anyone first realized. But Rhodes didn't just torment Regina, he even taunted her father, because about a month after she disappeared, he called him anonymously, saying,
I made some changes. I cut her hair.
Then, he admitted he had left her in a barn, and when her father asked if she was still alive, Rhodes hung up. By then, Regina had already been murdered. Rhodes strangled her with wire, twisting it far more times than necessary to end her life. Her body was later discovered in that same barn by a farmer, shortly before the property was due to be burned down. FBI agent Mark Young, who worked on the case, recalled how the forensic report revealed the disturbing detail of her shaved pubic hair, something he identified as the killer's signature. On April 1st, 1990, Rhodes's reign finally came to an end when an Arizona state trooper stopped his truck and discovered another woman chained inside. Rhodes was arrested on the spot, charged with aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. As investigators dug deeper, they tied him to the murders of Regina, Ricky, Patricia, and Douglas. And although Robert Ben Rhodes was eventually sentenced to life in prison, investigators believe he may have killed as many as 50 people between 1975 and 1990. Today, all that remains are the haunting photographs he left behind, evidence of one of the most terrifying killers to ever stalk America's highways. And the last photo of Regina, a teenager who simply wanted more. On October 16, 2011, a small community in Utah County was left heartbroken after a tragic train accident claimed the lives of 3 teenage girls just a day earlier. Essa Ricker and Kelsey Webster were killed instantly when they were struck by the train, while Kelsey's younger sister, Savannah Webster, survived the initial impact and was rushed to Primary Children's Medical Center in Salt Lake City. For context, the Webster sisters had only recently moved from Sonora, California, to the Covered Bridge community 2 months prior. Both Kelsey and Savannah were students at Diamond Fork Junior High School in Spanish Fork, where they were just beginning to adjust to their new lives. According to Utah County Sheriff Sergeant Spencer Cannon, the 3 girls had been out near the railroad tracks just off Spanish Fork Canyon, taking photographs. Investigators believed they were aware of an oncoming train, but did not realize another was approaching from the opposite direction. Caught in between, they had little time to react, and it still isn't clear whether the girls were struck by both trains or if the force of one train pushed them into the path of the other. Either way, the deafening sound of the first train likely drowned out the approach of the second, leaving them unaware of the danger. Moments before the tragedy, the girls had been smiling and laughing, taking a selfie as the wind from the first train blew their blonde hair around them. In that photo, the faint glow of another train's headlights can be seen in the top right corner, which is now a haunting detail that only became clear in hindsight. And what the girls may not have realized is that trains traveling at around 55 miles miles per hour, need over a mile to stop, even with emergency brakes fully engaged. In this case, the train bearing down on them was moving at roughly 39 miles per hour. The conductor, John Anderson, and the engineer on board, Michael, spotted the teens about 12 seconds before impact. Michael repeatedly sounded the horn, desperate to alert them. There was no response. When the train finally came to a halt, nearly a quarter of a mile down the tracks, Anderson rushed back to the scene where he found two of the girls dead. Then faintly, he heard Savannah's voice near the crossing. She was injured, frightened, and in pain, but still alive. Doctors at the Salt Lake City hospital fought to save Savannah. She had sustained more than a dozen broken bones, internal bleeding, blood clots, and a severe brain injury. But despite every effort, she passed away 3 days after the crash, leaving her family and community devastated. On July 1, 2025, an Italian motorcyclist, Omar Farang Zin, was mauled to death after attempting to feed a brown bear and her cubs, despite multiple warning signs along the route advising tourists not to do so. Just the day before, on June 30th, Zin had uploaded a Facebook album documenting earlier encounters with bears along the same highway. In the photos, he could be seen smiling, posing with his helmet on, while a bear lingered in the background. Officials stress that feeding bears in the region is strictly forbidden. Signs posted along the Transfiguration, written in both Romanian and English, explicitly warn against it. Even for those who cannot read the text, the images on the signs clearly illustrate the danger. Yet witnesses reported that Zin had stopped directly in front of one of these warnings before approaching the animals. And when he got too close, the mother bear became aggressive, attacked, and dragged him into the forest. Drivers passing by immediately called emergency services, and soon, dozens of police officers, firefighters, and armed foresters were dispatched to the scene. Search teams eventually located Zin about an hour later, but by then, he was already dead. The bear then turned its aggression toward the rescuers, forcing hunters to shoot and kill it. Local officers also remained in the area afterward, struggling to keep curious tourists from approaching the dangerous site. But Zin, who worked at Malpensa Airport in Italy, was not the first tourist to fall victim to such an attack. Just weeks earlier, 3 other visitors along the same highway had been mauled after trying to feed bears, including a 75-year-old Spanish woman who suffered deep wounds to her arms and required hospitalization.
So, all in all, these recurring incidents have reignited debate in Romania over bear management. Former Environment Minister Mircea Feșe urged the European Commission to reconsider the protected status of brown bears in the country, arguing that hunters should be allowed to cull the population to reduce attacks. But that appeal is still awaiting a decision, and Zin is now 6 feet under the ground, all because of his disobedience.
When I got the call and I was told about these 2 women, Chris Kramers and Lisanne Froon, 21, 22 years old, tourists, they go to Panama on this hike 8 years ago and were never seen alive again.
On April 1, 2014, 2 Dutch women, Chris Kramers and Lisanne Froon, set out on what was supposed to be a simple hike-in. They had been staying with a host family and even brought along the family's dog for the trip. However, that dog eventually made it back home, while Chris and Lisanne never did. 21-year-old Chris and 22-year-old Lisanne were both Dutch college students who had just graduated and chose Panama as their celebratory getaway. They'd arrived a couple of weeks earlier, and on March 29th, they made their way to Boquete, a town on the western side of the country, where they stayed with a host family. On April 1st, they decided to hike the La Pianista Trail. Their plan was to reach the summit, about 8 kilometers from Boquete. A taxi dropped them off at the trailhead, and the driver, Leonardo Arturo Gonzalez, who, strangely enough, died less than a year later under mysterious circumstances, claimed he dropped them off mid-afternoon, but photos from the women's camera suggest it was closer to 11 a.m. The hike was meant to take about 2.5 to 3 hours to the summit, so the whole trip should have been 5 to 6 hours round. And that same morning, the women posted on Facebook about meeting others and about their journey ahead, a journey that would ultimately lead to their deaths. Now they had set out lightly equipped, wearing casual clothes and carrying a small backpack. Inside were their passports, a single water bottle, a Canon PowerShot SX270 digital camera, about $80 in cash, and their phones. They reached the summit around 1 p.m., but instead of turning back, it looks like they decided to push further into the jungle. Most hikers stop at the lookout point at the top of the Pianista Trail and head back down the same way. Nowadays, there are signs warning tourists not to go past that point without a guide, since the terrain beyond is steep, remote, and dangerous. It's possible Chris and Lisanne had researched the trail beforehand and thought they had enough time to reach a waterfall deeper in the jungle, but they were nowhere near prepared for such a long trek. When they didn't come back that evening, it wasn't immediately alarming, especially since the dog had returned safely. But by the next morning, April 3rd, concern began to grow. Search teams were launched quickly, using helicopters, dogs, and ground crews, but there was no trace of the women. On April 6th, Chris's parents, Hans and Roelly Kremers, flew to Boquete with Dutch detectives. They expanded the search, bringing in specialized rescue teams and trained dogs. The search continued for 10 more days, but still turned up nothing. No Chris, no Lisanne, and no belongings. The family even offered a $30,000 reward, but there were still no leads. It wasn't until 10 weeks later that something surfaced. A local woman found a backpack resting in a rice paddy along a riverbank, about 5 miles beyond the summit of the trail and roughly 10.5 miles from Boquete. To get there, it would have taken at least an 8-hour hike from the women's last known location. Besides, the area was so remote that reaching it on foot would have been extremely difficult. Even stranger is the fact that everything inside the backpack was completely dry, despite the jungle's constant rain and humidity. The woman who discovered it also swore that the bag hadn't been there the day before. Now, inside that backpack was something investigators would call a goldmine of evidence. Among the passports, cell phones, sunglasses, and cash, the most important item was Lisanne's camera, because on its memory card were 133 images in total, though one was mysteriously missing. Photo hash 509. The camera itself didn't have GPS, so investigators could only guess the locations of the photos by looking at the surroundings. The first pictures, taken on April 1st, were nothing unusual, typical tourist shots. Both girls are smiling, laughing, and even taking selfies at the divide overlook. Most of the shots were taken by Lisanne, with Chris walking ahead of her on the trail. But then the photos shift, showing the girls on an indigenous trail near a creek headed downhill, away from Boquete, where they were supposed to be going. In one shot, Chris's face looked tense, almost anxious. The very last photo taken that day was a photo with sequential number hash 508. However, it had two versions stored in two separate files. One file says it was taken just 8 seconds after hash 507, while another claims it was taken 50 seconds before. Plus, photo hash 509 was missing. Now, these inconsistencies raised eyebrows, making people question if that camera had been tampered with, because normally, when a picture is deleted, it leaves behind fragments that can be recovered. But Dutch specialists couldn't do that. Cameras also don't skip numbers by accident, meaning someone not only deleted photo hash 509, but also erased its metadata using a computer. The remaining photos, around 90 of them, were taken in the pitch dark between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. on April 8th, 7 days after the hike began. Rain was falling, yet many of the shots were clear, not blurred, which means they were taken deliberately. Phone records also show that on April 1st, the day they disappeared, Chris's iPhone tried calling emergency numbers 112 in the Netherlands and 911 in Panama, but neither went through. The next morning, both phones were used again, and Lisanne's Samsung briefly connected for just a second or two before the call dropped. By April 6th, Lisanne's phone had died, while Chris's iPhone wasn't used again until April 11th, when it was switched on for about an hour, then never touched again. During those days, over 70 failed attempts were made to unlock the phone with the wrong PIN, possibly by a panicked Chris or by someone else entirely. But months later, the search took a wild twist when, on June 19th, local guides and indigenous Ngobi searchers found scattered human remains along the Culebra River. Some belonged to Lisanne, others to Chris. Lisanne's left foot was discovered inside her boot, intact, still laced, with the sock inside, though multiple bones were fractured. Forensic analysis noted how strangely clean the cut of her bones looked, with no signs of teeth marks, claw damage, or gunshots. In total, 33 bones were eventually recovered, scattered miles apart, but always along the river's path. Chris's pelvic bone and a rib were found, as well as Lisanne's femur, tibia, and even a rolled-up ball of skin from her shin. Oddly enough, while Chris's bones were bleached and clean, Lisanne's showed signs of slower decomposition. This made people wonder if their remains decomposed naturally, or had someone messed with them. The truth is, nobody really knows. What is clear, though, is that with the missing photo, the odd nighttime pictures, the phone records, and the strange state of the remains, this mystery is far from solved.